Hello, I am Lorraine Jones, State College resident for over 17 years and the proud president of the State College NAACP, serving Center County region. The NAACP's mission is to ensure the political, educational, social, and economic equality for all citizens. Moreover, we work to achieve equality of the rights and eliminate race prejudice. As we reflect on our history this month, let us remember our Black women in history that have paved the way for so many. I have selected Bell Hooks for my moment in history. Ultimately, Bell Hooks' untimely passing this year has been devastating for the Black community. Bell Hooks was a Black writer, social activist, and distinguished scholar, and her work showed how women of color have been marginalized by power structures in society, as well as by white feminists who purport to support about the universal struggles of all women. Hooks argues that mainstream feminists silence experiences of race, ethnicity, and class. For more than 3 decades, Hooks has explored the representation of race in popular culture and how this affects social relationships and public education. She often explored varied perceptions of Black women and Black women writers and the development of feminist identities, and what she described as their ability to perpetuate systems of oppression and class domination. She published around 40 books, including works that range from essays and poetry to children's books. She will be greatly missed, but her legacy and contributions live on. To be truly visionary, we have to root our imaginations in our concrete realities while simultaneously imagining possibilities beyond that reality. One of the most vital ways we sustain ourselves is by building communities of resistance, places where we know we are not alone. And this is my moment in history.
My name is Terrell Robinson. I am the Vice President of the NAACP State College chapter. I've been living in State College for about 3 years now. My moment in history highlights Langston Hughes, and I would like to recite a poem called Mother to Son. Well, son, I tell you, life for me sure enough ain't been no crystal stair. It had tacks in it and splinters and boards all torn up and even no carpet on the floor. Bare. You see, all the time I've been a climbing on. I've been a climbing and reaching landings and turning corners and even going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So you see, boy, don't you turn back. Don't you go out there and sit on them steps, because you'll find it kind of hard. Don't you fall now. Please don't you fall. Because eyes are still going, honey. Yes, mama, still a climbing. Because life for me, son, sure enough ain't been no crystal stair. I resonate with that poem ever since I was a little girl. with my grandmother, an avid reader. I was in junior high school at the time, and she would have me sit down and read. And she told me to read that poem. And that poem reminded me of my grandmother and me, and how I watched her as a single mother take care of all her children as well as her grandchildren. And she worked a full-time job as well. And she says, never, ever give up. Whatever dreams you have, you go for them. And if anything that you want to change, you do have the power to change them. If anything you don't like, you get into office and you change it. And so that is why I love Langston Hughes, that particular poem, Mother to Son, because it reminded me of my marvelous, fantastic grandmother.
I am Andre Cobrath, and I've been a State College resident for 8 years. I'm a veteran of the United States Air Force, and I'm proud to serve the State College NAACP chapter as a vice president. Our community depends on our collective advocacy efforts, and we need you to assist us in our fight against injustice. Join in our work in education and advocacy. Again, we need you. My moment in history is about the Orangeburg Massacre of 1968. After the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, segregation officially ended, but in much of the South, it hadn't. Students went to the All-Star Bowling Alley in Orangeburg, South Carolina to protest the whites-only policy in February. The governor called in the National Guard, tanks and all, to intimidate the students who led the protest at South Carolina State University. It turned deadly when highway patrolmen opened fire on about 200 unarmed Black student protesters. 3 students were shot and killed: Samuel Hammond, Delano Middleton, and Henry Smith. 28 protesters were shot and wounded. 9 of the 70 officers were charged with shooting at the protesters, but were acquitted using a plea of self-defense, and only 1 did 7 months for inciting the riot. A documentary was released in 2008. This is important to me because these 3 students lost their lives protesting the Jim Crow laws that we're still fighting today. May we never forget these 3 young men and the price they paid for advocating against racial injustice. And this is my moment in history.
I'm Darlene Clark, a State College resident since 1990 and a proud NAACP member. My moment of history highlights Medgar Evers, who was a civil rights activist, born in Decatur, Mississippi in 1925, who served bravely in a segregated United States Army in World War II and became the state's first field secretary for the NAACP, working to end segregation. Medgar Evers heroically spoke out against racism in the deeply divided South, fought against Jim Crow laws, and protested segregation in education. Evers traveled throughout his home state, encouraging African Americans to register to vote and recruited them into the civil rights movement. He was instrumental in getting witnesses and evidence for the Emmett Till murder case. He earned a bachelor's degree in 1952 from Alcorn State and applied to the University of Mississippi Law School, but his application was rejected because of his race. One of his more famous quotes was, "When you hate, the only person who suffers is you, because most of the people you hate don't know it, and the rest don't care." In the driveway outside his home in Jackson, Mississippi, Medgar was shot to death on June 12, 1963, by a white supremacist. Medgar was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia. The Medgar Evers College was established in 1970 in Brooklyn, New York, and the Mississippi International Airport was renamed in his honor in December 2004 to Jackson Medgar Wiley Evers International Airport. Mississippi's governor announced that a U.S. naval ship would also be named in this civil rights activist's honor, a dry cargo ship christened in 2011. There now stands a National Historic Landmark in Jackson, Mississippi. Medgar Evers lives on. This is my moment in history.
Hello, everyone. My name is Vita Ayer, and I am the Communications Chair of our State College chapter of the NAACP. I am also the organization's Assistant Secretary. And today I have chosen to read a few excerpts from President Barack Obama's 2008 speech given in Philadelphia and entitled A More Perfect Union. I was very inspired by this speech, not least because I only became a citizen of the United States in 2007. And I found many of the ideas in this speech, including the details about President Obama's family and his heritage, to be very inspiring. I believe the messages he is giving us in this speech are very relevant today as we continue to work toward making this nation a much greater one by repairing the wounds of the past and hoping to inspire our future generations to build a more just and equitable country for all. So here are some excerpts of this wonderful 2008 speech given by President Barack Obama in Philadelphia. We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, 221 years ago, in a hall that still stands across the street, a group of men gathered, and with these simple words launched America's improbable experiment in democracy. Farmers and scholars, statesmen and patriots who had traveled across an ocean to escape tyranny and persecution finally made real their Declaration of Independence at a Philadelphia convention that lasted through the spring of 1787. The document they produced was eventually signed, but ultimately unfinished. It was stained by this nation's original sin of slavery, a question that divided the colonies and brought the convention to a stalemate until the founders chose to allow the slave trade to continue for at least 20 more years, and to leave any final resolution to future generations. Of course, the answer to the slavery question was already embedded within our Constitution, a Constitution that had at its very core the ideal of equal citizenship under the law, a Constitution that promised its people liberty and justice and a union that could be and should be perfected over time. And yet words on a parchment would not be enough to deliver slaves from bondage or provide men and women of every color and creed their full rights and obligations as citizens of the United States. What would be needed were Americans in successive generations who were willing to do their part through protests and struggles on the streets and in the courts, through a civil war and civil disobedience, and always at great risk, to narrow that gap between the promise of our ideals and the reality of their time. I am the son of a Black man from Kenya and a white woman from Kansas. I was raised with the help of a white grandfather who survived a depression to serve in Patton's army during World War II, and a white grandmother who worked on a bomber assembly line at Fort Leavenworth while he was overseas. I've gone to some of the best schools in America and lived in one of the world's poorest nations. I am married to a Black American who carries within her the blood of slaves and slave owners, an inheritance we pass on to our two precious daughters. I have brothers, sisters, nieces, nephews, uncles, and cousins of every race and every hue, scattered across 3 continents, and for as long as I live, I will never forget that in no other country on earth is my story even possible. It is a story that hasn't made me the most conventional of candidates, but it is a story that has seared into my genetic makeup the idea that this nation is more than the sum of its parts, that out of many, we are truly one. Contrary to the claims of some of my critics, Black and white, I have never been so naive as to believe that we can get beyond our racial divisions in a single election cycle or with a single candidacy, particularly a candidacy as imperfect as my own. But I have asserted a firm conviction, a conviction rooted in my faith in God and my faith in the American people, that working together, we can move beyond some of our old racial wounds. That in fact, we have no choice if we are to continue on the path of a more perfect union.
I am Janet Ayer, State College resident for over 25 years and a proud member of our local chapter of the NAACP. Today, I am highlighting the activism of Ida Bell Wells. This famous founder of the NAACP is best known for her anti-lynching crusade, but her crucial role in campaigning for the rights of Black women to vote deserves to be known as well. The women's suffrage campaign took place over 100 years ago in the days of Jim Crow. This meant that Black women couldn't work as equals inside the white-only suffrage movement. So instead, they worked energetically in their own communities. In Chicago, Wells created the Alpha Suffrage Club and made it a force to be reckoned with in local politics. Club members engaged in block-by-block canvassing, published a newsletter, held forums to discuss the issues, and championed candidates who would support the needs of the Black community. Their work helped ensure that the city of Chicago and eventually the state of Illinois voted for women's suffrage. This kind of activism had significant success. Few people realize that the actual language of the 19th Amendment does not say what color the person is who is being given the right to vote, only that the right to vote shall not be denied on account of sex. So upon ratification of the 19th Amendment, thousands of Black women took themselves to the registrar's offices to register to vote. In Virginia, according to historian Suzanne Lebsack, Black women qualified in impressive numbers in several cities, despite the fact that they faced the same obstacles, such as poll taxes and literacy tests, that their male counterparts faced. As Black suffragist Hallie Brown put it when the amendment was passed, "We stand at the open door of a new era." But although the ratification of the 19th Amendment created new opportunities for Black women, their attempts to register were also challenged at every turn. For example, at one of those registrar's offices in Virginia, Black women were told to register in a separate room from whites, and then that room was not staffed long enough to get everyone registered who was standing in line. More than any story from 100 years ago, this final story evokes our contemporary moment. Just as was the case then, in 2022, the tactics of voter suppression are the greatest threat to our voting rights. And just as in the past, Black women have not let these tactics stop them from putting their talents on the line to work for the right to vote for all of us. This is my moment in history.
The eulogy delivered by Ossie Davis at the funeral of Malcolm X at the Faith Temple Church of God, February 27th, 1965. Here at this final hour in this quiet place, Harlem has come to bid farewell to one of its brightest hopes, extinguished now and gone from us forever. For Harlem is where he worked and where he struggled and fought, his home of homes, where his heart was and where his people are. And it is therefore most fitting that we meet once again in Harlem to share these last moments with him. For Harlem has ever been gracious to those who have loved her, have fought for her, and have defended her honor, even to the death. It is not the memory of a man that in this beleaguered, unfortunate, but nonetheless proud community has found a braver, more gallant young champion than this Afro-American who lies before us, unconquered still. I say the word again as he would want me to, Afro-American, Afro-American Malcolm, who was a master, was most meticulous in his use of words. Nobody knew better than he the power words have over minds of men. Malcolm had stopped being a Negro years ago. It had become too small, too puny, too weak a word for him. Malcolm was bigger than that. Malcolm had become an Afro-American, and he wanted so desperately that all of his people would become Afro-Americans too. There are those who will consider it their duty as friends of the Negro people to tell us to revile him, to flee even from the presence of his memory, to save ourselves by writing him out of the history of our turbulent times. Many will ask what Harlem finds to honor in this stormy, controversial, and bold young captain, and we will smile. Many will say, turn away from this man, for he is not a man, but a demon, a monster, a subverter, and an enemy of the black man, and we will smile. They will say that he is of hate, a fanatic, a racist, who can only bring evil to the cause for which you struggle, and we will answer and say to them, did you ever talk to Brother Malcolm? Did you ever touch him or have him smile at you? Did you ever really listen to him? Did he ever do a mean thing? Was he ever himself associated with violence or any public disturbance? For if you did, you would know him. And if you knew him, you would know why we must honor him. Malcolm was our manhood, our living black manhood. This was his meaning to his people. And in honoring him, we honor the best in ourselves. Last year, from Africa, he wrote these words to a friend. He said, my journey is almost ended, and I have much broader scope than when I started out, for which I believe will add new life and dimensions to our struggle for freedom and honor and dignity in the States. I am writing these things so that you will know for a fact the tremendous sympathy and support we have among the African states for our human rights struggle. The main thing is that we keep a united front wherein our most valuable time and energy will not be wasted fighting each other. However, we may have differed with Malcolm or with each other about him and his value as a man. Let his going from us serve only to bring us together now. Consigning these mortal remains to earth, the common mother of all, secure in the knowledge that what we place in the ground is no more now a man, but a seed, which after the winter of our discontent will come forth again to meet us, and we will know him then for what he was and is, a prince, our own black shining prince, who didn't hesitate to die, because he loved us so.
My name is Terry Watson, and I'm happy to be the co-chair for the Educational Planning Committee for the NAACP in State College. I've been here in State College for about 15 years. In 2022, we are still trying to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the Black community. Speaking up and speaking out is something that we must all strive to do. For my moment in history, I want to honor all the law enforcement professionals who not only protect the community, but speak out, whistleblow, or intervene when they see injustice. For Black police officers in America, I'd like to recognize one individual that began this trailblazing journey, my great-grandfather, Moses P. Cobb. Moses Cobb was born July 12, 1856 in Kinston, North Carolina, and was the eldest son of slave Eli and Holland Cobb. Moses P. Cobb would go on to become the first patrolman to have a full career in the city of New York, and a trailblazer for racial equity. After taking a 500-mile journey from Kinston, North Carolina to Brooklyn, New York, Cobb held odd jobs here and there until he took a janitorial job at a local police station. With the encouragement of his superiors, Moses joined the Brooklyn PD in 1892 and retired in 1917. During his tenure, it was believed that African Americans should not hold positions of power, including as law enforcement professionals. For the majority of his career, he was not allowed to wear a uniform or carry a gun in order not to offend the white public. This might be why, after his retirement, when he moved back to Kinston, North Carolina, residents would see him wearing his patrolman uniform. Friend and director of the Harlem Historical Society, Jacob Morris, goes on to say that the P in Moses P. Cobb stood for perseverance. Moses had to endure mistreatment from the police department as well as the black community. He even had garbage thrown at him in the streets that he patrolled. Cobb would eventually convince and mentor his brother-in-law, Samuel J. Battle, to become a police officer. Samuel Battle would go on to become the first black sergeant, lieutenant, and parole commissioner for the NYPD. Cobb passed away in June 23, 1926, but his legacy continues on. On October 29, 2011, in Brooklyn, where Cobb had patrol, a street that includes the NYPD's 77th precinct was named for Patrolman Moses P. Cobb. Members of my family were present during a ceremony that honored Cobb's service. So this is my moment in history.
Hi, my name is Terrell Williams, State College resident for 3 years and a proud member of the NAACP. Today, I'll be reciting the poem Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. You may write me down in history with your bitter and twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room, just like the moon and like the suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hopes springing high. Still, I rise. Do you want to see me broken? Bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries. Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard, 'cause I laugh like I got gold mines digging in my own backyard. You may shoot me with your words. You may cut me with your eyes. You may kill me with your hatefulness. But still, like air, I'll rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I am a black ocean leaping and wide, welling and swelling. I bear the tide, leaving behind the nights of terror and fear. I rise into a daybreak that's wondrously clear. I rise, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. Thank you. Maya Angelou's poem, Still I Rise, is powerful and draws on a range of influences, including her personal background and the African American experience in the United States of America. Its message of liberation and survival was a consistent theme in Angelou's work. Years after it was published in 1978, the poem continues to reach readers and audiences, outlining the racial disparities cutting across the lines and the national boundaries. And this is my moment in history.
I am Leslie Lang, State College resident for 15 years and the co-chair for the State College NAACP chapter. It was my pleasure to produce this Moment in History tribute. I have selected to share Nelson Mandela for my moment in history. Nelson Mandela was a South African anti-apartheid revolutionary, political leader, and philanthropist who began studying law at the University of Witwatersrand, where he was the only Black African student and faced racism. He established South Africa's first Black law practice in 1952. Mandela is known for dismantling the legacy of apartheid and fostering racial reconciliation. He was imprisoned for 27 years for opposing South Africa's discriminatory apartheid system of racial segregation. He faced harsh conditions that were meant to break his resolve, but he was finally released in 1990. In his lifetime, he received more than 250 honors and was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1993 for having led the transition from apartheid to a multiracial democracy. Mandela was the first Black head of state and elected in the fully representative democratic election, and he served as the first president of South Africa from 1994 to 1999. Mandela is remembered for saying, "It always seems impossible until it's done." And to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. February is Black History Month. It is an annual observation in the United States. And as it provides a chance for everyone to celebrate Black achievement, and it provides a reminder for the United States to take stock where systemic racism persists, as well as to provide visibility to the people and organizations that create change. The truth is, Black history is American history. We hope that you have enjoyed this moment in history.